Welcome to week 14, day 65 of the spring 2025 Web Technologies course. I'm Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So as far as topics for today, I'm going to do a introduction to React, React.js, and also we'll go ahead and walk through I'm just basically going to do the lab, which is mostly just cutting and pasting. So I'm going to walk through that lab with you and kind of describe what's going on with that and point out some things as far as some concepts. So as far as the React stuff in general, just kind of want to, make sure that you understand that we're just trying to get a little bit of a introduction here, more just, using this platform, so to speak, the libraries, the framework, and using the terminal and all those kinds of things. And it's more from a configuration standpoint to seeing how things fit together, get things to work, and really that's about it. Kind of want to grab some little bit of concepts on it. Don't worry if you don't understand everything, because it's going to take time to learn all these concepts for Node and React, etc. So don't expect too much, but just kind of want to get a little bit of introduction and make sure that you can execute what you need to execute to get the assignments done. And then tomorrow I'm going to go ahead and do a separate video on a GitHub branch and merge assignment. It's really going to be a very simple exercise. It's kind of more I just want to make sure you understand what's in the real world, how it kind of works as far as repositories are concerned, and the fact that you're generally sharing a repository with other team members. Okay. All right, let's start this introduction to React. So, React's a cornerstone technology in modern web development. And our goal of this lecture is to understand its fundamental principles, how it works, and discuss maybe why it's become so popular for building user interfaces. Now, also what I'm going to be kind of going over here in this introduction is pretty much almost the questions that are in here for this React questions assignment as well. Okay, so just want to point that out. So what is React? React, often called React.js, is an open source JavaScript library specifically designed for building user interfaces or UI components. It's maintained by Meta, formerly Facebook, and a community of individual developers and companies. The primary purpose is to make it easier to create interactive, dynamic, and usable UIs for web applications. And you can also do specific web apps for just React Native, for mobile apps using React Native. React allows developers to build complex UIs from small isolated pieces of code called components. So React's all about components, okay? Focuses on the view layer in a model view controller type architecture pattern. Effectively updating and rendering components when your data changes. So React's all about kind of changing of data. When data changes, which is called state. The data is your state, and when your state changes, it's going to render those components in the browser. Okay. And real quick here, as far as a model view controller, so React's basically the view layer, right? Let me show you an example here. So this is from MDN Web Docs. This is a model view controller diagram, and just to kind of show you how this kind of works, you basically have your view, and your user is going to perform something, maybe put some data in there, click a button, whatever. It contacts the controller, and this controller then could, depending on what you're doing, generally you're changing data. When you change the data, it's going to change the model, and this model's holding on to your data. Okay, and from our perspective, like I said, we're just working on we're looking at the view layer only, right? But how it's going to work in the real world generally is you're going to have more than just a view layer. Okay, and it follows the model view MVC, model view controller architecture pattern. So like I said, a user would maybe click a button or enter data. And when they enter that data, a controller is going to take that and it's going to manipulate this model. And then this model is going to update the view layer. Okay. Sometimes actually there might be some instances where data doesn't really change. And in those cases, the view may send something from the controller. It has nothing to do with updating data. So the controller sometimes just updates directly the view based on something. There's not a lot of such scenarios, I guess, for that. But, it could be, let's just examples, maybe something where you're changing something from uppercase to lowercase, rearranging how something looks, or maybe rearranging how something looks on a page without really changing the data. Then maybe just the view and the controller would be involved in that exchange. Okay. So like I said, with React, everything is about components. Components are the building blocks of any React application. They let you split the AI into independent, reusable pieces. Think of them like custom HTML elements you define yourself. So there's basically two different types of components. Functional components and class components. Functional components, these are simple JavaScript functions. They accept properties, which are called props, as an argument and return React elements describing what should appear on the screen. With the introduction of hooks, and we're gonna take a look at this here when I go through the lab. But we're going to use useState. I don't think we have a use effect for that, but we're going to be using useState, and basically it's a hook. And basically, functional components can now manage state and lifecycle events using these hooks. And we'll look at that a little bit. And that makes them the preferred way to write components for many developers today. Okay, so for our purposes, we're really only going to be looking at functional components. There's also called class components, and these are ES6 classes that extend basically functionality that React already has, called React Component. They have more built-in features for like local storage management and lifecycle methods. While it's fully supported, but it's kind of something that they're trying to move away from. Okay, but it's still there. It's within later versions of React. But functional components with hooks are often considered the simpler and more modern approach. So for our purposes, we'll be using functional components. But just to let you know that there's two different types, both functional and class components. Key differences: functions. It's basically just a function component is basically a function, whereas the other ones are basically ES6 classes, right? State and lifecycle functions components use hooks. Class components do not. They use what's called this.state and this.setState to build lifecycle methods. Okay, don't understand it. If you don't understand what all that means, and I'm sure you don't, and because it's a lot. Don't worry about it. Like I said, just remember things to point out that functional components use hooks. Remember that. Remember the type of component it's preferred to use are called functional components. Okay, but there are two different types. Okay. Now let's go ahead and look at what JSX is. So when we say JSX, it's basically just a extension when you create a file. And we create files where we call index.html. or maybe our server.js for a JavaScript. And then we looked at doing modules, right? Where we had the MJS files, that extension. That was for Node, right? But within React, there's also the what's called JavaScript XML, which is a JSX. So it would be the name of your file, .jsx, okay? And it's a syntax extension for JavaScript recommended for use with React. Okay, it looks very similar to HTML or XML, but allows you to write your UI structure directly within your JavaScript code. Why is it used? For readability. It makes component rendering logic more visual and intuitive, resembling the final HTML structure. So you'll see basic HTML right there in your JavaScript code, which we've kind of done a little bit of that. Not quite like that. When we use the DOM thing, you have to use those DOM functions, right? The JavaScript DOM functions to create a new div or this or that. But within the JSX, you can just put your HTML code in there. We did use string literals to do that as well. So, I shouldn't say you can't, you don't do that in just regular JavaScript. But it's just a little bit different here with React. It also allows you to embed JavaScript expressions like variables and function calls in there. And then also it keeps the rendering logic and the UI markup in the same place. And also it actually it compiles. Okay, you don't have to worry about that. But JSX is not directly understood by browsers. It gets compiled, and we're actually going to see that happening when we go ahead and create. When we do this lab, we're going to be using Vite, which will actually take care of that behind the scenes. Okay, we won't have to worry about it, but that's what it does behind the scenes. What else did I want to mention about JSX? So, and I guess I'll discuss this a little bit more in the future. When we do the lab as well. But as far as like a JSX file, think of how when we were doing assignments, we had like our navigation. We were doing Bootstrap navigation, and so we actually cut and pasted it from one. When we had multiple files, we cut and paste in different files. That's really not the way to do things. We just did that because that's kind of what we knew to do as far as from a static HTML perspective. But using React, we can actually create a nav component, and that nav component's going to have variables in there, and we just would have one nav component, and then we can pass things in, right? We could pass things in there for which thing to mark as active, etc. So that way we don't have to duplicate effort, right? We just have one nav component, and based on variables, based on parameters that we pass in, we can change that. We can manipulate and change that, how that nav bar looks, right? Per a different page or whatever, okay? So here's a simple example of a JSX file. Basically, you've got a name variable called world, and then you have an element tag, and you're just doing it just like this, okay? And then this kind of gets compiled. This is actually going to end up getting compiled into something like this, okay? And that's just kind of an example there. Also, this idea of props. And what are props? Props are short for properties. They're read-only inputs passed to React components. They are how components receive data from their parent components, allowing for dynamic and reusable component creation. Think of them like function arguments for your components. Okay, and so that's what I was I was talking about, the nav bar, having a nav bar component. And that's what you would kind of do, is you would actually pass parameters into your nav bar component from your parent Okay, and then you would be able to reuse that because of that. Okay. So think of them as like function arguments for your components. How are they passed in? Props are passed in from a parent component to a child component using attributes. So here's an example where we're actually importing. We kind of did a little bit importing. This is different. This is, different from our node stuff in a little way, in some ways. But, you're basically importing a child component, okay, into your parent component. And then your parent component's actually going to go ahead and pass variables, okay, passing name and age as props. And then in your child component, okay, your child are going to, props are going to be received as single object argument. And then here you can do props.name and props.age. And this would actually end up being changed into Joe and 30 for the name and the age, right? Now, the students have done C# already. They understand the idea of being immutable and immutable. We did talk about that a little bit as far as in JavaScript as well as far as strings and stuff. But, props are immutable, so a component must never modify its own props. And they're basically unidirectional from parent to child. It's a top-down data flow. If a component needs to change data based on interactions, it should use the state, okay? It should not change the value of a property. So what is state? State's very important for React. State is data that is private to a specific component, okay? And can change over time. Unlike props, which are passed from the parent, state is managed within the component itself. Changes in state typically trigger re-rendering of the component and its children. It represents the component's memory. Okay? Which component type manages state? Functional components use this use state hook. And we'll take a look at that here in a little bit when we go through the lab, to declare and manage state variables. And then also class components use this built-in this.state property. So it's a little different. We're not going to be really worrying about this. Like I said earlier, we're going to just really be concerned about these functional components. So how do you update state? Why not modify it directly? Okay, so in functional components, useState returns a pair, the current state value and a function to update it. You call it like this: set count and a new count, and this is going to update state. And in a and this is how it's done for a class component. We're not going to worry about that. And we're going to look at this here when we do the lab. Why not modify it directly? You should never modify state directly. So like just saying this dot state, changing, grabbing that variable and just assigning it to another variable. You really need to use for, especially with this functional components, you need to use the use state. Okay. React relies on this set state function. Or the state setter for use state to know that the state has changed. Calling these functions does two critical things. It queues an update to the component state, and it tells React that the component and its children need to be re-rendered with the updated state. Okay, so if you don't do that, it kind of goes against React's whole life cycle and how it handles those things. Okay. So you never want to just change a variable's value. You want to do it with useState. And we'll take a look at that. So directly modifying the state bypasses React's update mechanism. So React won't know about the change and won't re-trigger or re-render, leading to an inconsistent UI. Okay. So one thing I did not mention, and I don't have part of this, is React's very good for what's called SPAs. An SPA is a single page application, whereas you're just doing everything with that in that page within that page itself. You may update a lot of different things. It may even look like you're accessing multiple pages. You could have tabs and everything else. It may look like you're accessing it, but it's actually built kind of all in like a one single page application. It's not the only way, but it's a very common way to use React is for single page applications where you're kind of doing everything within the one page itself, and you're not going and getting different pages from the web server. Okay. And that has a lot to do with this whole re-rendering. So you make a change, then you want to be able to re-render that change and see that right away. Okay. The virtual DOM. So one of the big things about React is it has this idea, this concept of a virtual DOM. And so the virtual DOM is a programming concept where a virtual lightweight representation of the UI, the actual browser DOM, is kept in memory and synced with the real DOM. Okay, so what it kind of does is it takes the document object model, which we've worked with that, right? We worked with that in JavaScript assignments. It takes that and makes a copy of that. It has what's called a virtual DOM. Okay, so it's essentially a JavaScript object tree that mirrors the structure of the DOM tree. And believe it or not, it actually, by React doing that, by React having it like that, actually makes it faster, makes the whole the document object model faster, because the document object model kind of rebuilds the whole thing. So when you use that virtual DOM, you're actually it's doing something different where you're going to update that virtual DOM. Then that virtual DOM is going to find the most performant way to update your DOM without kind of recreating it. Okay. It's kind of complex. Don't worry if you don't understand all of that. Like a lot of these concepts, just realize that that React has a virtual DOM, which is basically a lightweight representation of the actual browser DOM. Okay, and it's kept in memory, and it syncs up the virtual DOM with the real DOM. Okay. How does it contribute to performance? Direct manipulation of the browser DOM is often slow and computationally expensive. And when they say computationally expensive, meaning it just takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of resources for that. That DOM's slow. It takes a lot of RAM memory to do that. So React uses a virtual DOM to optimize this process. So update, when a component state changes, React first updates the virtual DOM, which is fast because it's just manipulating JavaScript objects in memory. Then it kind of does this diffing. React then compares the newly updated virtual DOM with the previous version of the virtual DOM. Okay, so it actually has multiple. It's a snapshot taken before the update. This comparison process is called diffing. Okay, then there's this process of reconciliation. React calculates the most efficient way to make that real DOM match the updated virtual DOM by identifying the minimal set of changes required. Okay, so example, which specific elements need updating, adding, or removing. Batching, React batches these minimal DOM updates and applies them to the real browser DOM in a single optimized step. So you don't have to worry about all that. All that stuff's happening under the hood. It's just good to understand kind of from a conceptual standpoint how React actually does do that. That's how it works. Okay. So by minimizing direct interactions with a slow real DOM and performing calculations in a fast virtual DOM, React significantly improves rendering performance, especially for complex applications with frequent data changes. Okay, so a lot of times the things we've done, things look pretty fast to us, but from a when you got much more complicated type user interface, it is slow, even though it might still appear from a human, from us, for our standpoint, but from a computer standpoint, it's slow updating the DOM. So that's how React optimizes that. Okay, and also let's talk about event handling. How do you handle events? To handle events, a little bit different than what we've done in JavaScript. So like clicks, form submissions, key presses. So in React, you attach an event handler function to JSX elements using a special camel case attributes. So there's one thing you want to make sure that you always have camel case on your on click, on change, on submit. It has to be camel case or it won't work. These event handlers are typically methods defined within your component are passed down as props. Okay. So the difference from HTML event handling, React event names are camel case instead of lowercase. Handler type in JSX, you pass a function reference like this. Handle click as an event handler rather than a string of code instead of calling a function like that. Okay, and we'll see an example of that here shortly. Preventing default, you cannot prevent the default browser behavior by returning false from an event handler. You must explicitly call the event.prevent default. So here's a quick little example where, and here you're using useState. Not that that's really part of what we're talking about here with the the handlers, but so basically here's useState, and you're setting useState to 0. So you're basically just kind of, this is the default value, and then you're doing here's your variable count, and this is the method you use to set your count, right? And this, as opposed to updating a variable, like, if count changed from 1 to 3, we were used in our JavaScript code, just changing count equals 3 to change it. Well, you don't want to do that. You don't want to update this count yourself. You want to go ahead and update this count by using set count. Okay. And when you do this, and you have useState here, that's how it's going to work for React, and React's going to know that you have changed the data. Okay. But back to the event handler here. So you're going to have a handle click here. Okay. You're creating a function called handle click. Here you're just setting the count, and here's your set count, and you're doing count plus 1. Okay. Here you're not changing, even though you've got count here, this variable, you're not changing the variable, right? You're just you're taking count, add 1 to count, and you set that on count. So you're not explicitly changing your count variable here, right? You're just using that, adding 1 to it, and then setting count. And this updates the state on click, okay? And then, so if we come down here and look at it, so within your JSX file, you're always going to have this kind of a return, and we're going to look at this here in a little bit. But you're going to have a return, and then here you go ahead and here's your HTML. Here's your button. You do on click. Make sure you're using camel case, and this is how you call a function. This is how you call a function within your component by using your curly braces and a handle click. And so this is going to call. This will call handle click here that's defined. Okay, key component, key concepts. So component composition, this is a fundamental principle in React. It means building complex UIs by combining smaller, simpler, and reusable components. Kind of like I was talking about, like having a nav bar component. You can have a nav bar component. You can have a whole screen where each part in that screen is a separate component, and that's kind of what you want to do. You don't want to have a component being your whole screen. You want to have those different areas on your screen being individual components. Okay, and it's very helpful and useful for code reuse too. So, and sometimes you could have, some organizations, we're going to have like component libraries that they're going to use. So you could fire up a new application, you grab your component libraries, and you can, and these are custom libraries that maybe you created yourself at your organization, and you can grab these different components to use. It makes things a lot quicker and a lot easier, right? A component can render other components, which can render other components, forming a tree structure. This promotes modularity, making code easier to manage, test, and reuse. For example, a user profile component might be composed of an avatar component and a user info component. So there's a lot more concepts than this, obviously, for React. I just want to kind of go over a few things. The important thing is realize about the concept of, let's just kind of go back up here. It's all about components. It's all about components in React, right? For the most part, you really want to use functional components, okay? And functional components has this, the idea, this has this concept of hooks, and there's different kinds of hooks. We're going to be looking at use state here in a minute, but there's also use effect and others as well. And then also components. So JSX, you write using JSX, you can create different components. And JSX stands for JavaScript XML. And what else I want to point out here? It basically allows you to embed HTML right there within your JSX file. And it does get JSX is not understood by browsers. So basically, what happens, we're going to be using a tool here that actually is going to take care of that, and it's going to actually compile this JSX into something that's understood by browsers, which is basically the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. It's important to understand about props. Props are short for properties, and these are read-only inputs passed to React components. And remember that this flows from parent. This is going to flow from parent to child. Okay. You can't change them. They're immutable. Okay, it's important to understand state. State is data that is private to a specific component, and the state is managed within the component itself. And like I just mentioned, that functional components use the useState hook to declare and manage state variables. And why you should not modify a variable directly is because React relies on the setState function to know that the state has changed. Calling these functions does two things. It queries an update, and then it also tells React that the component and its children need to be re-rendered and updated basically on the screen in the browser, right? And one of the reasons that one of the things that React is known for is basically using a virtual DOM to make it a lot faster to update that DOM, the document object model, and it uses a virtual DOM, and it kind of does it actually creates two different virtual DOMs. It's like the current one, and then when you update something, it's going to have the previous DOM and the new DOM. It compares them, and you would think, it'd be. Most people, from a logical standpoint, would look at that and say, well, that seems like a lot. Why don't you just update the DOM? But believe it or not, it's actually faster. And so that's one of the key things about React. And we looked at event handling, and we'll take a look at that here when we start the lab. So with event handling, you make sure when you call it, you're calling it, when you call it from your code, you're using the curly braces and just the name. You don't want your open and close parentheses like we're typically know how we've typically learned how to call functions. And let's see, that's about, okay. And then to review on the composition, it's basically, it's about, you really want to build multiple little reusable components. So your screen is going to be a bunch of different components, right? That's the way to do it. Obviously, for the stuff we're doing here, not, it won't be so complex. But when you do more complex things, that makes it much more important to make sure that you have things defined as individual components. You could even have a button be an individual component. It can get down to that, or a group of buttons, or some special certain functionality on the page. It could be very complex as far as the number of components you have. So in conclusion, React provides a powerful and efficient way to build modern user interfaces through its component-based architecture, use of JSX, state management, and performance optimization like the virtual DOM. Understanding these core concepts, components, props, state, JSX, virtual DOM, event handling, and composition is essential for anyone starting with React development. So like I said, don't worry. I know this is probably a lot, especially we're doing a lot of static stuff in HTML. This is a framework library that takes a while to learn and understand, but it will makes things a lot easier once you can start getting the hang of it. Okay. And like I said here on the core concepts, basically, not that I covered every single thing here, but kind of gave a I kind of followed this for the most part. We just kind of the same thing that we just kind of went over are the questions here in the React question homework assignment. Okay. So let's go ahead and close this up. Let's close that up. So let's go ahead and take a look at the assignment, the lab assignment. So for that, so basically, here's my repository. Obviously, I'm sure mine looks different than yours. I just play around in here. I don't generally check in real code here. But, basically in your root directory, you want to create this React.js folder, like it says in the lab assignment. And then in there, you want to kind of create a, what do I have here? React Lab 1. Yeah, I think it tells you to do that. Create a React Lab 1 folder. So I have that, and then I just right click to open this up, obviously. And so that's what I have here on the left hand side. So basically here's the directions, and so once you open up your React Lab in Visual Studio Editor, on the top navigation, you want to choose Terminal, New Terminal. Make this a little smaller. I know this is going to kind of mess that up a little bit, but that's all right. So I'm going to go to Terminal, New Terminal. So obviously, if you, for some reason, you end up having multiple folders, you want to make sure that you're in your root folder here. Okay. Let me move this over. I'll move this over as well. And so then in here, what we're going to use is called Vite, V-I-T-E. And what this does, Vite's what's called a build tool. It's a build and it's a build tool and a development server. So kind of like what we used Live Server for, but Vite has its own built-in server. And we also did the Node.js server, the Node.js, but we're not going to be building. That was more for demonstration purposes. It's something you can do with Node. You can build a web server with Node. And there's some practical uses for that as well. But for the most part, when we use React, we want to we want to build something out that's more complex than just a basic little web server like we did with the Node assignment. Or, well, I don't know if you guys completed that yet, but that was part of the Node lab assignment, was to create that web server. But for Vite's a build and development server. It's responsible for processing your source code, including your JSX files, your CSS, etc. It makes it runnable in the browser and optimizes it for a production type environment. Vite itself is a command line tool that runs on top of Node.js. So that stuff all kind of happens together. Okay, they all it's kind of intertwined. React and Node and Vite. Now there used to be the older way to create a React project had this React create command, and you use React create, but probably the more common way nowadays is using Vite. Okay, so how does Vite React? How does it interact with React? The Vite development server running on Node.js. Okay, so when we're running it in this in our editor here, and when we do this, it's actually running this on top of Node.js. Okay. And so it's running this on top of Node.js. It compiles your React code into plain JavaScript on the fly. It handles your module imports, provides hot module replacement, which is called HMR. So if you change something, it's automatically going to change in the browser, okay, without having to reload and doing all that. And then also, Vite has this, can do more than that. So we're just doing things for testing purposes. We're used to using our editor and just a browser and seeing all of our changes. But if you want to go ahead and deploy something, deploy one of these React assignments or React applications, I should say, Vite also has this thing. It'll build it. So it will take all of this, it'll build it into your static files, your HTML, your JavaScript, your CSS, okay? It'll create a distribution that you can take and actually take that and deploy that somewhere, okay? And we will do that. Let's see. So I guess that's all I really want to talk about on Vite. So let's go ahead and grab this. So we're in our directory structure, React Lab 1, and then we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to run this command. And I'll tell you what, I'm actually going to move this over because this doesn't work well in this case. All right, so basically got npm create Vite.latest. It's going to get the latest version of Vite. This is the name of our app, so it's going to create this. It's going to create this directory. All right, and let's hit enter here. So what happened here? And this is a lot faster than it used to be. So it's got your to-do list. Look at all this stuff. It built out that quickly. It did all of this. Okay. And this is just the basic structure of creating a basic structure for you to start with. Okay. So the next thing in here, what you want to do is you're going to want to go ahead and CD to this. So we're going to CD to do. I don't know why that's doing that like that. think I made it mad from earlier. So let's do that, and then we're going to do a npm install. Okay. So what npm install, remember we kind of did this yesterday when we did npm. Sometimes we installed certain packages. We had to do an npm install space, and then we knew the package name, right? But what this is going to do, and we kind of did this, we kind of learned this, is here's your dependencies, right? Here's your dependencies. It's going to actually go grab these dependencies and build it. That's what it's going to do when you do npm. It's going to read the package.json, which it created itself, right? It created this itself, right? So this is the React DOM. These are dependencies that are needed, and for Vite, right? This is needed for Vite, and also for us to build our React app as well. Okay, but it uses this, and it's going to grab these. And so we just do npm install here. There we go. So it loaded 30 packages. So here's all the different packages under node modules. Okay. So whenever you do an npm install, always think, well, when you do that, you're basically you're adding something, or you're adding something to your node modules. And if the node modules directory doesn't exist, it's going to create the node modules directory and put everything in there. And then obviously if you just did npm install in a specific package, just one specific package, then it's just going to add it to the existing one, right? Okay, so we did that. And so this is what we can do now. What was our thing? So we want to do npm run dev. So once again, npm run dev is actually going to come in here, and it's going to run the script. npm run dev is going to run the script. And this is just internal stuff. For Vite, you don't have to understand all this stuff necessarily, okay? But Vite's just making your life a lot easier. Like I said, we talked about this will just basically build it for you. This will not build it. It's going to build it internally, but it's just going to make it for you to work through the editor just for local development purposes. Build, like I spoke just a couple minutes ago, build will actually get this thing ready. So if you want to deploy this somewhere, right? But for us, we're just going to go ahead and do. Let's see, what are we doing? Just make sure. npm run dev, yes. npm, so let me, npm run dev. And now if I go ahead and click on this, usually, you need to use control, then click. And I had to do it twice for some reason. And so then basically here's the app. This is your kind of your base app that we're going to use, and we're going to build it from there, right? And this just puts a bunch of stuff in here, Vite plus React. Here's a little counter it has, okay? All right. Well, we can actually go ahead and, why don't we just go ahead and put this over there. Put that there. Okay. But I'm still probably going to stop this server when we start making changes here. Okay, so what we did basically there, we're doing the project setup. We did all of this, right? We did this, and now we want to go ahead and create these different components, right? So we just follow directions here. So within our source directory, and actually I'm going to just go ahead and stop this because we're going to be making a lot of changes. It's just going to end up showing errors here. So I'm going to stop that for now. Just hitting Control C to stop it. Okay. So, I want to talk about SRC. So, we've created different directories for our assignments for HTML and JavaScript and so forth. But usually, when a common directory for code is SRC, and when I work, basically when most of my career, that was basically your main directory that you created to put your code in. Okay, but within there you had subfolders and so forth. Okay. So it's a very common directory to use. And in here, it created all this, just us making this VDAP. You've got assets, you got assets, which is basically this little image here. Okay, and then it has CSS, and we'll go through these a little bit. Okay, and we're going to end up changing some of these as well, because basically what is here is going to create what was here on the screen. We're going to want to update this. We want to change this, all right? So under source directory, we want to go ahead and create a new folder. And we want to create this folder called components here. And under that, we want to do what? Let me see. We want to create a new file. So we want to create our first component here, right? First component is going to be a to-do form. So this is basically a to-do form app. I probably should have kept an example of this so I could show you the app before we start it, but I don't have that. So in here, we're just going to create a new file. Okay. And that's going to be this to-do form.jsx. Okay. And then in here, let's go ahead and I need to move a couple things around. All right. So in here, I'm just going to cut and paste, right? So you can just grab all that code from there, and I'll go through a little bit of this so you kind of understand what's going on a little bit. You just cut and paste and put that in here. All right. So the first line is we're importing useState. And so which one? This is the to-do form. Okay. Did I grab the right one here? I think I did. Yeah, to-do form. Sorry. So the first line is we're doing the import useState. So this line imports specific functionality from React library, which is the useState, which is basically a hook. useState is a React hook that allows functional components to manage local state. Okay, so that's what that means. So if you ever have an interview question and say, what does useState do? Right? What is useState? useState is a React hook that allows functional components to manage local state. And then we have a function called to-do form. And then as you can see, we're setting useState here. So we're saying that this is basically input is going to be some data that that's going to be state data, right? Input. And we're going to set that to empty. Usually that's what you're usually setting in something to empty or 0, or sometimes it's an empty array. Usually it's kind of the default value you're setting it to. Okay. And then, so this is your variable, which you don't want to change, right? We already discussed you don't want to change this. To change this variable, you want to use the set input method. Okay. And in this case, it's setting the input method basically here. Well, in this case, it's setting it to empty. And then down here, it's actually setting it with a value. Okay. I don't want to go through too many things, but like we said, this is how you set state. This is how you're going to set a variable. Okay. Handle submit. This is a function, an arrow function. and you're doing a handle submit, you've got a form on submit. And this, like we were just talking about earlier, this is how you call a function from within your JSX file from an on submit. Okay, you need to make sure this is on submit. Camel case. And another thing I want to mention that's very important, it's easy to make this mistake, is in JavaScript in JS, HTML and CSS, we're always used to this being class, right? But class is a reserved word in React. It's a reserved word, so you can't use just class here, okay? You need to have class name. Okay, class name, there's that. So there's two different ones. I'll have to check if there's other ones as well. But I know class is one that you have to, instead of using class, you have to use class name. And the other one is for, right? So you can't use for. You have to do what's called, you have to name it HTML4. And when we get there, I think there's a lab that we'll be working on tomorrow. It'll have a for, and I can show you that. But number two, that you can't use what you would think you would use, the names that you would be normally using for HTML, CSS. You have to use class name for class, and for a for like a label, you have to use HTML4. So I want to point that out. This tends to be something. It's easy to make this mistake and use class instead of class name. And this is obviously using a class, okay? This is using a CSS class. Okay. What else do I want to talk about in here? So we have the prevent default. We've seen that. See if I got any notes here. Oh, yeah, the export. So an export can only have one default. So basically, from a component, you're always gonna you're exporting something. When you do export, you're basically exporting. You're basically exporting this. This is what you're actually returning. Okay, this is your return. But you can't just say return and that's it. You have to use this export. Okay, so this is going to actually report. This is going to return the to-do form, which is this is your to-do form. Okay, and you only can have one default. You can have potentially multiple things you're exporting, but generally, probably best practices, you really just kind of want to do one for one when you you have a form, you just want to return that. There might be some cases where you're going to return multiple things, but you only can have one default. And so this is basically telling you, hey, this is the main thing that I'm planning on returning from here. Okay, not that you can't return other things, but it kind of complicates things when you start returning different things. But this is kind of telling you, oh, what am I returning? This is what I'm returning. This is my main thing I'm returning from this function, right? From this component. Okay, so we have that. So let's go ahead and do our next one here, which is what? Create another component. So we're going to create another file here. And this is going to be our 2-item list. And so we've got to grab that. It's going to be a little shorter one. So this one here is so this is doing an import of a third-party library, a third-party library. FA stands for font awesome, and this is a trash and a check. And what this is going to be doing is these are fonts, and this is going to be a check mark. The other's for like a little trash can. You click it, right? Trash can. And this is a check mark. And this is from font awesome. So we'll have to install these specific, okay? We'll have to do the npm install for this font, for font awesome, okay? For these. So here we've got a to do. We're passing something, right? Or something's being things are being passed in, I should say. Things are being passed in, right? These are props. Props are being passed in. So remember, whenever you got props passing in, the props are going to come from a parent to a child. Okay, so we'll look at that here in a minute. So let me look at the font stuff. So here you gotta. This is how you go ahead and do that for a font, and you're putting registering an event, an on-click event, to this icon. Okay, both for trash and check. Let me grab that just to show you where that is. So I think I had this. So this is the font opposite. Awesome website. This is basically a check mark. We're doing that one. The other one was what? Trash. I think that I can just get away with that. Yeah. And so these are different trash icons, right? So we use trash and check, and that's from Font Awesome. And so this is the Font Awesome website. But when we're grabbing it, we're using NPM, right? So when you use NPM, where are we going to get NPM? NPM is going to be here, right? NPM is going to be here. So whenever you use NPM, I don't want to say this website, but basically it's a repository, right? And so everything that's in the everything that you use NPM for, you'll be able to search for those packages. Every package that you would install will be available and shown in here. Okay, it doesn't actually grab it from the website. It's just it's grabbing it from a repository. But this NPM, this is this basically shows you all the packages that are available. All right, and so we'll have to install that later. So then we have another component here, and that is going to be our to-do list. So let me go ahead and create another file here. Create that one. I missed something there. That's a bad thing sometimes. You put a bunch of code in the files. That's one thing you'd have to make sure you don't miss anything. See, especially cut and paste. It's easy to miss things. So actually, just almost by looking at this, you kind of go up to the top. You can kind of tell. Not always. Some components can call other components in, but you're calling in certain. You're calling in certain things here, right? And then if you can kind of actually see when you're calling some of these things, you're passing some props here, right? You're passing some props here. So when you're passing props, you kind of know this is the parent, right? So actually this is the parent class, and the to-do form and the to-do item, these are the child's components, okay, of this parent component. So the list is the parent component, right? And then the children components, the to-do form and the to-do item. In this case, you're basically, your to-dos is an array of to-dos, right? You're going to have a to-do list or multiple to-dos. So you're wanting to initialize this to an empty array, okay? And this is how, like we were discussing earlier, this is how you're going to set your to-dos, right? So this to-dos, you can tell by looking at this is going to be an array, right? To-dos is going to be an array. You're not going to update this by itself. You're going to use set to-dos to update it. And here you got an add to-do, remove to-do, complete to-do, all right? And this is what gets returned here. Okay. Now we do, even if we ran this, things ain't going to work because it was kind of set up. Yeah, we have to update some other files. Okay. So here is basically the, this was just set up for Vite for their little demonstration, their base application that they have. So we're going to have to actually go and update this. All right. So we're going to want to we're going to cut and paste. And we're just going to grab all of this and delete it. And so here's our app. Okay, our to-do app. This is our component. This is our main component, right? This is the parent component we're bringing in here, right? This has significance. This is, from a React, from a Vite standpoint, this is kind of an entry point here, okay? So you want to do that. And then also, let's see what else I have here. Some CSS. So let me grab the CSS, and we're going to update that CSS in that app CSS. Grab all that. All right. So in our app CSS, we're going to take and just delete that, put all of that in there. Let's see what else we have here. So for now, we've got this index.html file. So probably you want to change the name of this, because this is kind of the basic, just like how when we did the GitHub pages, you have to make sure you have an index.html file. It's basically the entry file, right? So this is going to stay like this is. It's going to have this icon under the V, but at least change the title here. And so this has a root thing. And so this is all about kind of DOM, just like we've done for JavaScript. We did the DOM. We're replacing things. We're replacing this root element with basically all of the HTML. Everything's going to be put in here, right? It's DOM manipulation, right? It's just done a different way. So this is this. Here we've got the main JX. And so strict mode, just how we used to use strict in JavaScript. This is kind of the same concept. And make sure that you're really just following when you create your JavaScript files, that you're actually, you can, if you don't make it strict mode, obviously if you don't make a strict mode, then you can kind of get away with some things in the JavaScript files. But if you make strict mode, you're going to have to make sure you follow it, right? And then you're rendering, you get the element by ID, which is the root, which we're just seeing the index.html, right? And then you're actually rendering your app. This is your app. App from app.jx. And your app is your to-do app, right? Here's your to-do list. Your to-do list is the parent, right? Your parent. All right. So let's see. Hopefully I saved all this. I think I did save all this. Did I save the CSS? All right. Now what we can go ahead and do. Oh, so let's see. After updating. So what we're going to have to do here still is we're going to have to install the React icons, right? So what we're going to want to run down here. I don't like it does. I don't like when it does that. So we want to do npm install and React icons, okay? And that's going to be, where do we have that icon? Was that in the form? No, was it in the form? Was it? No, that was the item. So these are the React icons, right? React icons. So that's what we're doing here. We're installing React icons. It's going to go grab that. npm install, it's going to drop that into our node modules. Okay, now it's in our node modules so that we'll have those icons. And then now all we want to do here is npm run dev. And now let's go ahead and bring this up. figures it. Why didn't it work? What did I miss? Did I not save something? Components to-do list. That looks good. Let's see here. So obviously CSS wouldn't matter. Something else. What did I miss? App.js. We'll have to take a look. I updated this. It's got to-do list. Did I not have that saved? Oh, yeah. I didn't have this app.jsx file saved, so now it's coming up. So you just basically put a to-do list in here. You got little check marks. And you can go ahead and so that'll line that out, and then you also have delete, your little trash can here, then your two little icons, and you can delete those. So there you go. Let me put this here and this here. So also, like if you change anything, what's your plan for today? Clean a little of this up here. Too much stuff. So if you basically, you change anything in here, hit save, it's going to automatically update. So as you're going along, it will update. Just sometimes if you do something wrong, you make a mistake, it's going to tell you. So, and this is what you'll see when you have an error, okay? So if you miss something, you didn't put an ending, in this case, I just put a space on something, right? But if you miss a curly brace, etc., it's gonna complain. It's gonna tell you once you fix it and save it, it'll update it. Okay, so that's all I have for today. Please let me know if you have any questions. I think most of the problems you'll have with this would probably just be maybe misspelling something or missing, because a lot of this is just cutting and pasting from the file over. So making some kind of a small error like that. So besides that, you probably shouldn't have too much of a problem with this. Like I said, don't worry if you don't understand all this. We'll get there in time. The biggest thing I just want to, have you learn to use the command line tools to create things and just the basic overall understanding on kind of, the little bit of stuff on how React kind of works a little bit under the hood. So thanks a lot and have a great day.